Welcome to the Voice of Retail Special O Cannabis Conference Edition. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This special edition podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. I recently attended the O Cannabis Cannabis Conference, a multi-day event in Toronto, and has always met and heard lots of really interesting cannabis industry thought leaders in this close-knit and expanding community. I thought for this episode I'd let the interviews speak for themselves to give you a good flavor for the issues and the insights that I heard. I was fortunate to interview three amazing thought leaders from different perspectives on retail recreational cannabis. A top global retail industry thought leader, the CEO of a top cannabis retailer looking to reimagine the retail experience and the customers they serve, and a US-based integrated LP and retailer to help us see around the corners to what's next and upcoming for retail recreational cannabis in Canada. So first I chat with the one and only Tony Chapman, back on the Voice of Retail, this time talking about retail cannabis and his role as the MC for this event. Next, I chat with Tom Dyck, CEO of Mihi Cannabis, who is drawn out of retirement from a successful career at a major Canadian banking institution into a whole new industry. And last, but certainly not least, I talk with California-based NUG CEO and founder John Oram, who takes us through his journey from scientist to fully integrated producer and retailer in the U.S. So let's listen in as I sit down first with Tony Chapman, talk about Bong Shows and moonshots. Tony, welcome back to the Voice of Retail. Thanks again for joining me again, so to speak. We're here sitting at the O Cannabis Conference in Toronto. Great sessions, lots of learning going on. Not our first cannabis conference together, not your first conference. The first time was in the fall, I think, in Niagara. And you had this great presentation. What was it called?
It's a Bong Show.
It's a Bong Show, which I loved. I stole that mercilessly, though I did quote you on it.
Okay.
As a title. So tell us a little. Let's start there. Talk about that presentation, and then let's fast forward to today. And did these things come true? And what are your observations sitting in the province that now has physical cannabis stores?
Well, I spent 30 minutes with the Bong Show going, Canada's becoming a first mover advantage. We've legalized cannabis, arguably going to be the largest consumer product ever for three reasons. It's got medical properties, it's got recreational properties, and it's been sampled from people that are aged, legal consuming age up to age 80 have tried cannabis. So legalizing it was a utopia. Great way to do it. And you think about it right away, we're going to bring life into retail, create marketing jobs, branding jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars, and create Canada could be set up for the world, global brands. We could create our versions of the Pepsi Colas and the Lays in the cannabis space. But then as you saw the way the government legalize it is what a Bong Show. First of all, dividing it up, every province, every territory can establish their own rules. So there's no way any company could create scale because you're trying to play to the bureaucracies across the country. Some people are going to do online, some privately held, some government held. Nobody understood the rules. Policy was vague. And so what's happened is that we're constantly hitting into these speed bumps. This whole conference today in cannabis is how do we get around, or how do we interpret the rules so we can still get it out? The greatest example, Michael, is that so many people, if they're going to come into a cannabis store, are coming in as a new user or a latent user, and they need information. The packaging doesn't have information. It'd be like you walking into an alcohol store and you didn't understand what was the proof. What was the variety, let alone the region it came from?
A lot of education, and even worse, the brands have no meaning.
They have no meaning.
That may just be a point in time, but really, you see all these myriad of brands. And I've been in cannabis stores across the country. I was in one yesterday in London. Nice little Central Cannabis. They won a license. They got their license to go on March 11th, and God bless them, they were open up, and nice little operation. But you look around and you're like, all the things that you've talked about. You've worked on in your career, you've talked about, the P's, the place, the packaging. Packaging is out of the equation.
Well, even the municipalities can decide if they're allowed to have it in it. So think about if we could wave a magic wand. The train's left the station. Let's not agree or disagree. Was it the right move? Cannabis is legalized.
And now we should, and I just want to stop you on that one point because politically, it's interesting that the federal government neither got credit nor blame for that, which I found kind of surprising. So this isn't a political podcast, but it's interesting that really a bold move. I mean, to any government to spend that kind of political capital, and they really, picking up some of the things they've been talking about today. There's been no major incident. There's been no major since it's been launched public security incident. But they don't seem to have gotten any credit politically for doing it. I mean, you talk about the differences in different ways it's been done in the province. Some of that's constitutionally based. some of that's just, you guys run it because you own the province, you're closer to the people. But it's interesting how the politics has kind of washed over, and now you're into the regulatory phase. As you say, you can wave a magic wand, and it still could happen in Ontario.
Well, you can imagine if someone like a capitalist country like the United States, you can even argue China becoming such a capitalist, or India or Israel, they would go in there and say, and they would have launched that with the biggest moonshot. We are going to be a global leader in the greatest consumer launch that we've ever seen. We're going to use our sciences to use cannabis to a natural organic plant material on disease and taking away the opioid crisis. We're going to create recreational cannabis, which is healthier for you than alcohol. We're going to bring life to our main streets that need new stores. We're going to bring jobs to people that are passionate about this product. We're going to let our branding and advertising come up with some of the best global brand names. They would turn this into the entire society rallying behind it, because this is going to be as important to the country of the future economy as maybe natural resources was 100 years ago. That's the moonshot we're missing in Canada. So when you start spreading it out, and I think in some ways they were trying to make sure that they weren't risking their entire political capital by having every province slice and dice it, but you put all these layers of bureaucracy on it. Yes, we're creating some great policy to help Canada. Yes, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are playing with it. We're learning how to do training. We've got a couple of major Canadian companies emerging out of it. But when you think about it, when the United States puts their shoulder into it, they can take all that intellectual capital we've invested in and take it into their market and unleash capitalism. And before you know it, it'll be Uber Treats and Amazon and Whole Foods owning this owning the cannabis market.
So it's a little bit of first mover advantage becomes be careful with what you ask for, because we're moving with it. It could be, who knows how long it's going to be before the U.S. legalizes nationally. I think they're going to have a lot of financial FOMO myself, that fear of missing out. They're looking north and they go, wait a minute, we're the capitalists. How come the Canadians are all over this? You know, you're still seeing some of that legislation stymied in the U.S. So we still have a bit of a runway, I should say, for Canadians to continue to build in cannabis.
Every major pharmaceutical company is filing patents now. Everybody's setting themselves up for success. So, you know, first mover advantage is wonderful, but when you're running in cement, which is the way we're running it right now, it's an issue. Nobody will say it down there, because the last thing they want to do is get anybody from Health Canada angry. But if you listen to the sessions, well, we're trying to do this. No, you can't do that. Our bud tenders are key. No, you're not allowed to email that. Packaging's are definitely, if you could put it, you can put swag, but it has to be business to business. As opposed to going, if we're committed to this industry. And here, remember what the goal was. The goal is to take business back from the illegal market.
Yeah, three goals, though, right? Yeah. Protect children and youth.
Yes.
Keep the roads safe. And then third is get the black market out of it.
And let's be as honest as we can. And the government saying the taxes we can get if we took that market share away from black market.
Yeah. Now in Colorado, I understand just on that point. I understand Colorado, which is I've heard a couple of times today, a great model in terms of leading as a state. They still have the burden of the national Schedule I issue, and there I think the black market after 5 years is still 40%. And now that could be attributed to the fact that they're kind of an island in the middle of a bunch of states. But it's interesting, even with everything they have to play, the black market still holds a bit of sway.
Well, it does, because it's your price point. Taxes are
which they can fight. I mean, there's almost no floor, right?
Everybody thinks of the black market as some kid in a hoodie around the street. I mean, this is organized crime. It's a $60 billion business. They know marketing. They know distribution.
They know pricing strategies.
They know how to create different derivatives. So you're up against a formidable opponent. So if you're going to go up against that opponent and you truly want to take back share and protect children, you've got to make that product available. 25 stores in Ontario is not convenient. You've got to make it like they do in Colorado, where you walk in and there's a full range of oils and edibles, and California with almost half the market's vape. These are the things that the consumer is asking for. The consumer is asking for convenience, competitive pricing, quality, and choice of how I want to consume cannabis.
And physical stores, right? Based, right back to the core of what you've been talking about in your overall work, thinking about retail, is physical stores matter, right? Like even in the provinces in Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, where you can, I was talking to the New Brunswick NB folks, and they own both, right? They're private sector licensed to to the government. And they're underwhelmed by the amount of online sales. And I think it hits exactly on the points that you make, is it's not just about being efficient in buying a product. There's a lot more to it than that.
People are social creatures. Why LCBO's been in the online business for 5 years and has a 2% market share online. You know, and you're surrendering your data in digital. Going into a store, getting educated, getting a bud master, somebody's passionate about the product. Having a dinner party? Oh, have I got the product for you? Oh, you're looking to relax? Oh, you got some pains in the joint? Having experts that can help you, guide you through this, and take away, again, the basics of Maslow's hierarchy of need. Take away my insecurities. Give me a sense of pursuit that I'm after. Make sure I'm walking home with the right product. I've got the right advice. It's magical, and the municipalities are so worried about cannabis stores. They have to realize, again, it's not a bunch of people hanging around an old convenience store. This is boomers that are going to be going in. There'll be Mercedes in your parking lot.
Well, I was in it was my first observation in the London store, London, Ontario store yesterday. At least half the people in that store was there around 1 o'clock in the afternoon were 50, 60 plus, at least. I mean, the breadth of ages was, young as 19. And all the way to seniors. So it's really interesting to see, as you say, that intersection of all walks of life and all ages.
And what Main Street doesn't need that new traffic? So again, we're playing on the possibility. I heard again today, well, if we even had one trip up, who knows what will happen? Yeah, we're going to have some trip ups. Make a few mistakes. We're not talking about on the roads. We're not talking about, accessibility to kids. But as you're starting to experiment, let them go loose. Let Canada's creative community create some global brands, because we've got the opportunity. Another 2 years from now, the states will have legalized because politicians know what's at stake. By the way, it's not just taxes. You look at somewhere where the licenses went in this province and other provinces, you know that politicians are going to get involved with it. Look at what's at stake and say, create the energy that has the community rallying behind it, get rid of the Cheech and Chong stigma, and realize that cannabis is here to stay. And boy, that ant that hasn't knitted in 5 years with CBD might be able to knit again. That knee that's been bugging, you might not need surgery. Your sleeping problems that you're taking some pharmaceutical pill you might not need anymore. Start embracing the possibilities of this product and support it, and have Canada set up. And last thing I'll talk about my rant, tourism.
Canada tour. I was in BC. I was in Vancouver in one of the cannabis stores, and in were a couple of gentlemen from Quebec, and they were speaking French, and they were saying, "Oh my God, I think they actually have product here." They were so excited, and even within our own country, the Canada tourism, right?
Absolutely, where you come in and go, "I want to try this product. I don't know what's going to happen. Why don't we have hotels already set up where people can come in? You have supervision." You have dinner parties with it. You're just finding ways to ease people in. And by the way, you'll have people coming from all over the world to be part of it. And as they open up and legalize, and they've already come to that Canadian brand, that Canadian tourism, that Canadian hotel, that Canadian restaurant, guess what? We have an export opportunity. So that's all I'm saying is we've got first mover advantage. Let's take advantage of it. Let's be prepared to take some risk with it. Open it up. And that's why I've spent the last 4 conferences in a row with these guys, because I keep advancing the fact that someone has to push, and when you've got licenses, you're not going to push. Everything's sort of an underground whisper. I think we got to do a little bit more shouting back and saying we need to relax some of these things and bring in packaging and brands and retail and excitement and energy, and not just for Canada to make sure we don't just become a branch plant for it, but to give us the framework that we start exporting around the world.
I'm a little more sanguine about the opportunities in the short term, in as much as I don't. The way Ontario went to market and some of the others, was really, I think, driven by a shortage of supply, which, there's a bit of blame to go around on everybody on that one. Manufacturers, LPs. And I was talking to some entrepreneurs out on the East Coast, lost their house because they got a store, they got a license, but they couldn't get enough product. They actually had to shut the store down. So in some ways, it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. But I think if you and I were sitting down together a year from today, and supply issue has gone. So let's say there's we're close to a fullness of everything you can get. What advice would you give to retailers? Let's understand that the regulatory framework may or may not change from a packaging perspective, but the supply will. So now we got enough supply. You can get as a license. Ontario has talked about an infinite number of licenses, theoretically, once supply resolves itself. What advice would you have to retailers?
Passionate employees, your bud masters that are experts, empathetic, provides such passion for the product, making sure that on the medical front you're separating the sort of the fact and the fiction on it. And I would also say to the government, make sure you don't tax your way out of this business, because ultimately
leave a little bit on the table.
Leave some. You can't have a $3 a gram a differentiator because you consider it a sin tax, and you think you can grab a few extra $1 million because you will not take share away from the legal market. You're actually just going to let it make more profit, and we've seen that with counterfeit cigarettes in Ontario. And and on medical, no taxes. Think of medical cannabis as an answer as opposed to being, oh, that's just a clever way of saying I'm taking cannabis. Start really believing in the medicine on cannabis, which if you do, you won't tax it.
Tony Chapman, thanks again so much for joining me. Great conversation. We'll have it again because I think we're together again, or at least you'll be in the fall, right? There's another Cannabis conference in the fall, so I'll look forward to attending that, and we'll catch up again and see what a difference 4 months makes.
Perfect. Talk to you then.
Thanks, Tony. We'll be right back.
This is Steve Dennis. After more than a 20-year career as a senior executive at brands like Neiman Marcus, I'm now a consultant, speaker, and Forbes contributing writer on what it takes to reinvent retail in the age of digital disruption. And the good news is that physical retail isn't dead. The bad news is that boring retail most certainly is. So I hope you'll join me at Store 2019 to hear my unique take on the state of modern retail. As the lines between digital and physical blur, and as consumer preferences evolve, retailers need to reimagine their customer experience, often radically. In my keynote, you'll discover what brands around the world are doing to transform their business to be more remarkable, and you'll learn 8 killer strategies so you don't wind up stuck in the boring middle. That's Store 2019, May 28th and 29th in Toronto. Learn more and get your tickets now at storeconference.ca.
Tom, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Michael.
So you and I met on the trade show floor at Cannabis in Toronto, and I know of Mihi. I had worked or had the pleasure of interviewing Stefan from your organization on a panel, but it's such a treat to be able to talk with you and talk about the state of the retail cannabis nation. But first, why don't you, if you could, tell us a bit about yourself, your journey to your leadership role at Mihi, and then a little bit about Mihi itself. What's your value proposition about the company?
Sure, I'd love to. So my journey has actually been a bit of an unorthodox one. I actually finished a career working for TD for 32 years, where most of my roles over the course of those 32 years were in retail, and they sort of spanned a number of different business lines, both in Canada and in the U.S. And my final role, the last 5 years I worked there, I led retail distribution for TD Canada Trust. So there are 1,200 odd branches across the country and the 25,000 folks that work within them. And so really, I'd say the bulk of my career has been around building very customer-focused cultures and businesces within a highly regulated environment. And when you think about cannabis, actually, that becomes super relevant for sort of where we're headed. I think what made my journey a bit unorthodox is I actually retired a couple of years ago and had no interest actually at that time going to work, period. And I just became more interested in what was going on in the cannabis space, and spent some time traveling around through California, Oregon, BC, Alberta, a variety of different places, talking to retailers and different businesses, and found that whole journey really informative for me from two perspectives. One is I'm a guy who didn't smoke cannabis of any way, shape, and form, and actually spent about a decade hounding his teenage kids about the evils of this stuff. But through that journey, actually came to have a brand new appreciation for the product, and I feel like I'm more thoughtful about it, and certainly more knowledgeable. And the second thing was it created an opportunity for me to leverage some skills that I had developed over the course of 3 decades in a way that I think can bring a whole new level of retail experience to this emerging industry.
It's so interesting because, we hear it's not an uncommon story that many would look at the cannabis business as both a business opportunity and also as a different perspective on culture and being a citizen. It sounds like you've aligned to both. Let's talk about Mihi and what the business model is. It didn't, in speaking with Stefan, it didn't start originally as a build. It started more as a how do we grow this business? But you've obviously worked at a very high strategic level. How did you approach creating this entity that you now have control of?
Well, that's exactly what happened. Our original plan was to find an existing business somewhere in North America that was scalable, and then really bring that to sort of a broad level and a big level across the various markets that we participate in. And it was that journey that took me in my travels all across North America. I literally visited and talked to dozens of retailers. And through that process, what struck me was, first of all, that despite the fact that there was great enthusiasm for the category, and in fact, many of the enthusiasts themselves who've been longtime supporters of the product really didn't have the business skills required to build and deliver a leading edge retail experience. And so having access to talent and to the experiences and the knowledge that's required to build an actual large scale retailer could actually become a competitive differentiation and advantage. And that was the first thing. The second thing was that aside from the talent, it also dawned on me that most didn't, it was my impression anyway, that most really didn't understand the modern cannabis consumer. And if you actually look at most of the, I'll call it early brands from a retail perspective in this space, they generally were targeted to the under 30 male stereotype, with a lot of links back to the cultures that supported that stereotype. And so I really wanted to kick off a journey to say, you know what, not only will I hire really deep talent to create a new company, but it's all going to be anchored in a really, really deep understanding of the modern cannabis consumer, perhaps in a way that others don't have.
I love the idea of the modern cannabis consumer. I was in, I as well do a lot of cannabis retail store tours, more now that there's actually some open close to home. I was in one in Central Cannabis in London, and what struck me was the great variety of people in that store. The age from there was a few youngsters there, so to speak, 19, more older than 19, of course, but then there's clearly folks who are on the higher end of the age spectrum, not your typical Cheech and Chong audience, really. A very different, as you say, modern.
No, that's exactly right. And one of the sort of early signs that I was on the right track here was, even in my own circles, and I'd probably tend towards the later end of that circle than the early end of that life circle. And so do my friends. Sorry, everybody. But it wasn't until I got involved in the industry that friends that I had known for a long, long time essentially came out and said, geez, I've actually been using this vape pen or smoking once or twice a week for decades. And I had absolutely no idea. And so it really did reinforce my belief that this market is bigger than perhaps many think it is. And it probably doesn't look, think, or act like we actually think of the stereotypes. And you get those little reinforcements, whether it's like your visit to one of the stores where you can actually see the broad variety of folks that are in there, or whether it's through your own personal experience with your own network.
So with those insights in hand, you're not unfamiliar with a very competitive, notwithstanding regulation, marketplace. What elements do you think, or how are you crafting a brand strategy and a retail strategy that will make Mihi competitive? It's a little hard to imagine these days with so few stores, but that will resolve itself in the fullness of time, and there will be a lot of competition. What and how are you architecting the brand to stand out?
As I said, we started architecting our brand, rooting ourselves in understanding the consumer. And we've invested almost $1 million now in research and development through a variety of very, very deep and rich research techniques. Interviews, conversations. We've done everything from gone to people's homes and had conversations. We've done ride-alongs with police officers, dozens and dozens and dozens of focus groups and things like that, in addition to sort of traditional surveying. And what you find is that the modern consumer has a median age of around 37. You also find that there are as many boomers and seniors who are using cannabis as there are males under 30. Women as a subcategory are now the fastest growing segment of this group. And if you look at those folks who are regular consumers, almost 40% of them have kids at home. They're professionals. They're twice as likely to have post-secondary education and high-paying jobs. They don't look, act, or behave at all like the stereotype. And in fact, when you ask them about why they use cannabis and how they use it, what they'll really talk about, and I'll paraphrase what they've told us, is that they're really purpose-driven, and they're wellness seekers, but they're really on a quest to experience as much of life as they can. And in fact, the kind of language that they use is, I feel more normal, or I feel better, or more equipped, through my use of cannabis than if I didn't use it. And sometimes that can be as simple as using cannabis as a way to get a solid 8 hours sleep. But in other cases, it can be to help with focus or anxiety or things like that. So it's a very purposeful activity, and not one that's taken lightly. And what struck me in talking with these folks is that despite using a product that was helpful for them and that harmed no one else, they were essentially stigmatized, criminalized, and marginalized for using that product. And what they really want is to go to a retailer as a consumer that understands their journey towards a richer life experience and is actually going to focus on what they're looking for, what their needs are, and what their desired outcomes are. And to take away that stigma, in many ways, what they want is just normal. And so we're building a platform. Mihi was really founded on that insight. And so our entire organization is focused around, I would say, sort of 4 key elements. The first one is, if it's not already obvious, is our passion in the core of what we do every single day is actually our guests. And just intensely focused on the consumer in every single decision that we make is sort of our bedrock. The second thing is a very, very large focus on the culture of the organization, as well as who we hire and how we structure their roles within the firm. And so our staff are actually the linchpin of our entire business model. Because what we also heard is even for those folks who smoke almost on a daily basis, if not sometimes more, the most ardent users of cannabis will tell you they don't really truly understand as much about the product and its efficacy as they would like to know. And they want access to staff who are local, who are friendly, who are diverse, look and sound like them, but most importantly are expert, not just in the product itself, but helping them up with their journey to wellness through the use of the product. And so having a real staff orientation is really, really key to our model.
We see a bit of evidence for that already in even in the provinces where there is both, like in New Brunswick, where there's both retail and online sales that are available. The online sales are typically not performing the way people expected. And I think one of the reasons is because people are on that journey that you described, that, online, as we know, is very, very functional and might be useful at some point for replenishment. But, in terms of inspiration and helping you with a journey, you can't beat a well-trained,
I completely agree. And that's likely to evolve over, the next 5 or 10 years as people get more comfortable with the product. They become more aware of what their options are. And so I could certainly see a shift towards more online selling over the longer term. But in the meantime, even the most common users of the product will tell you they just don't know what they want to know. And access to a trusted advisor is absolutely critical to their experience.
So let's talk about advice for executives in a not dissimilar position. As you said, your career path with 32 years in a major industry like banking. You retired and then were lured back with the opportunity. Any advice? I talk to executives from all different types of facets who are, from intrigued to interested to skeptical about a move into the cannabis industry. And any advice? I mean, you made the move, clearly enjoying it and relishing it. Any advice that you'd share out to retail executives who are thinking
absolutely.
about
I actually get a lot of phone calls with very similar questions from folks. And I'd say a few things are really, really important. The first one is, if your interest in the category is purely financial, don't bother, because you just won't be able to credibly deliver to the industry and, more importantly, to the consumers what they're looking for. And we're at such an early part of our development that what we really need and want as an industry are folks who are focused on developing the industry first and letting the financial chips fall where they may. So that's the first one. I think the second one is, and it has less to do with the cannabis industry and more to do kind of just with career capabilities, is if you work at a large, I'll call it Fortune 500 company, and you spend the bulk of your time working for larger organizations with established routines and processes and pretty stable regulatory environments, you probably don't have the skills that are required to start a new company or work in a relatively new company in an industry that continues to form. Every single day, it brings something new. And I would tell you, I see more change in 1 week with mihi than I ever did working in big corporate Canada. And so it requires a different viewpoint. It requires a different filter, and it requires an extreme degree of flexibility. But what I would say is, if you're able to bring all of those things together, passion for the industry, as well as a flexibility and understanding that we're building a new industry here, you will not have more fun than that.
Well, it's an inspiring career journey, because you certainly had a transformation. And retail banking, of course, as we know, isn't the staid investment banking. Not to throw shadow on our investment banking friends, but retail banking is very dynamic, and I think there's more alike than different. But that's really great advice, and certainly embodied by your transformation into the industry, leading what hopefully in the years to come will be a top retail cannabis leader. Tom, thanks so much for making time for the Voice of Retail. It was really a treat to catch up with you.
Thanks, Michael, for having me.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to sort of talk to your listeners.
We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Join me at Store 2019. I'll be delivering a keynote titled From a Place to Buy to the Place to Be: How Bricks Can Counter Clicks by Focusing on Selling Moments versus Simply Peddling Merchandise. I then lead into an incredible panel discussion with 3 industry titans talking about the reinvention and reimagination of Staples Canada. Joining me is David Boone, the CEO, Joe Jackman from Jackman Reinvents, and Dragon Joe Mimran, who will talk about this incredible story and leave you with actionable insights and ideas for your business. Store 2019, we'll see you there.
All right, John, welcome to Voice of Retail. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It was, we met at the Cannabis conference. Thanks so much for joining us up in Toronto to share your insights and experience. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, scientist to manufacturer to bespoke cannabis producer and retailer?
Yeah, well, I've been operating in the California cannabis market since the mid-2000s, so right around 2006, 2007. Prior to that, I am a trained PhD chemical and environmental engineer, and I studied agricultural pesticides and how they move through fluvial systems and ultimately and bioaccumulate in fish tissue and ultimately in human tissue. So I looked at the health implications of pesticides as well. Sometime around 2006, I saw the need for quality assurance in California's cannabis market, and so I spun out a independent laboratory at that time. A CW Analytical is what it's called, and I started testing cannabis products and developing methods, analytical chemistry methods for cannabis products. Since then, I've spun out to be a fully vertically integrated business. We now cultivate, manufacture, and distribute at both the wholesale and retail level all across California.
Well, let's talk about that's your business. And it's a fully integrated, as you said, retailer, and I believe you have one bespoke store. I was looking at the images on your site; it looks fantastic. Tell us a little bit about the vision behind the store itself, your retail value proposition.
Sure. Yeah. We spent just a ton of time conceptualizing and then, actually building out and bringing the store to fruition. This is our first retail store. It is in Sacramento, California. It's the capital of California. It's a very large and very mature cannabis market. So we did see it as the right place to start the business, the retail side of the business. We have another 4 retail stores slated to open this year in California. But specifically on Sacramento, this, of course, we want retail to be profitable in its own right, but it's more than that for NUG. For NUG, it's really a branding exercise. It's all about brand control. It's all about controlling the consumer relationship to our brand, and we really felt hindered in doing that as a wholesale brand. We needed to have that direct consumer interaction. So we launched this project a little over a year ago, and we opened up about 2 months ago, and we're just having great progress. Great progress around development of the brand and brand loyalty across the state because of opening one very tightly controlled and tightly branded store in Sacramento.
Well, it's a very familiar strategy if you're a brand and a retailer, from an integrated manufacturer to the best expression of the brand as you see it, right? Because it doesn't always happen that when you're distributed in multiple points of any kind of product, that it doesn't always work out exactly the way you have it in your mind's eye. So really, it's a great strategy to take all the products, put it together, and it really becomes a showcase both for your retail partners and for your consumers and yourselves, right?
That's right. Yeah, we went into this eyed wide open, and I had to convince my partners, I had to convince my investors that it's worth spending a considerable amount of money to develop a retail establishment when really our core business is manufacturing and distributing goods across California. But I liken it to the Nike model. When Nike first started out, Phil Knight had problems controlling the experience around his brand and controlling the customer's interaction with his products. And so he opened, his own Nike store. And still to this day, you can buy Nikes anywhere at almost any shoe store across the country or across the world for that matter. But when you come to San Francisco or when you come to New York, you really like to visit that Nike flagship store. So with NUG, it's the same thing. You can find our products all over California, and you can find the same high quality, great products all over California. But when you come to Sacramento, we want you to, and you want to also come and see our store, see how we control the brand, how we intend for our products to be interacted with. And really, this was the best way for us to do it, was to open our own store.
So you operate in California, which as a state, I think has a lot of great lessons for operators in Canada. And that's why I thought it would be so great. And again, appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And, there'll be listeners to the podcast who have a greater or lesser degree of understanding of the U.S. context. So why don't we level set and help us understand one or two things that make it different to operate in the United States with a federally Schedule I product versus a state legal recreational product. Because sometimes I think, when Canadians look at it, I'm not sure they always appreciate how good we've got it with a nationally legal recreational product. What are some of the challenges you run into briefly? Again, just to set context.
Sure. Yeah. And, there's actually a lot of similarities between the U.S. market and regulations and the Canadian regulations. And then there's pluses and minuses on both sides. But in the U.S., the cannabis is a Schedule I registered, so illegal drug at the federal level. You cannot produce, buy, distribute the product anywhere in the United States. But the individual states have exerted their states' rights to autonomy around cannabis and have begun, started with medical cannabis as in the 1990s, and then that has developed over time, and now there's a responsible adult use in many states across the U.S. So the way it works is that the federal government has taken the position that they will take a hands-off approach for cannabis businesses that operate in compliance with their state regulations. So, it's, as an operator, we understand that and we maintain compliance, but that's not enough clarity for some of the, ancillary services. For example, banking. Banking in the U.S. is federally regulated. And even though I'm compliant at the state level, the banks don't want to take the risk of losing their federal charter. So they generally do not touch cannabis businesses.
So you get that extra layer of complexity. As you may know, in Canada, we each province, while federally legal, each province kind of sets their own standards for kind of go to market. So in some provinces, the municipalities have a much greater hand than others. In Ontario, where you joined us, the municipalities had kind of a one-time opt-out, and there's a consultation process. So there's some elements, but in other provinces, it's much more onerous at the municipal level. How is it in California, and how do you find operating as a retailer at the municipal level and the various neighborhoods that you are and then plan to be?
Sure. Now, so getting a little, micro, a little more granular, moving away from the federal level at the U.S. level and moving into the state, California does look very similar to Canada in that there is a statewide regulation, but then there's a patchwork of municipal regulations. Every city and every county in California has the authority to set its own regulations. They still must comply with the state. But as an operator, I must comply with the local municipality before I can go to the state and ask for a license. So in that sense, it's very similar to Canada. That just creates all kinds of confusion because I operate in almost every. If I don't operate, I at least have products in almost every municipality across the state, and I need to keep up on all of the taxing, all of the regulations at every single municipality. And that's burdensome, that's confusing, and it just makes things expensive.
Boy, you took the word right out of my mouth, burdensome, because in other realms in retail, we have in Canada similar challenges with things as pragmatic as plastic bags. There are different municipalities have different mill strengths, so it creates this huge, as you said, patchwork of legislation that makes it just expensive to operate in. But it sounds like you're managing, and I think. If I'm not wrong, that there's many municipalities in California that actually also opted out of either, because they can opt out of either having growing or retailing in their municipality. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, there's a number of different license types in California, ranging from all the way across the vertical, from production all the way through retail, and even to direct to consumer delivery. And yes, so those are all defined at the state level. Yes, every municipality can choose to opt out or opt in to any one of those certain categories. So there are some municipalities that just have a blanket ban. They say no cannabis whatsoever. There's some that say, oh, we will allow cultivation, but that's it. There's some that say we'll allow retail and nothing else. So again, it's just this patchwork. You kind of need to know where you're going and what you're doing. I'd say, if I try to blend it all together, I would say probably about 25 to 30% of the municipalities have adopted regulations to allow commercial cannabis in their municipalities. So if I flip that around the other way, that's 60 to 70% of municipalities that have not opened up yet. So I think there is a big opportunity for organic growth within California as those municipalities do finally come online.
My sense is, and I think some of the industry sense is, because in Ontario, the biggest province in the country, 77 municipalities opted out. But for many, the sense is, and that may not be precise, but the sense is it's when, not if. They kind of would like the thing to settle down a little bit. It's so new. They just said, well, let's come back and look at it again. Do you think there's a percentage of that 70% that are kind of waiting and watching and seeing what happens versus a percentage that are just, that their local government is just adamant against the product itself? What do you think that split is? And again, yeah. I'm asking just because it's illustrative for the Canadian markets and the retailers listening to the podcast.
No, that's right. So, the Prop 64, which legalized recreational cannabis here in California, that passed overwhelmingly. Statewide, I think the approval was in the 60%, and some municipalities had 80+% approval. So yes, I do think it's not a question of if; it's more a question of when some of these municipalities will come on board, and I do expect a considerable growth within California. Absolutely.
Well, let's transition out of the nuts and bolts of regulations, which is fun for everyone to talk about, and let's talk about your people. We've seen and we would know, and I've visited many stores across North America, and the people make the difference. How do you hire? What do you look for, and what's your approach in your retail stores?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I'll talk about that more generally than just retail. Across my whole vertical, I've got about 200 employees. We've been in operation for about 10 years now. And the strategy of hiring and finding the right people has definitely changed over that time. Early on, it was really about finding people you trust. So it was about hiring friends and family, people you trust. And it wasn't necessarily about finding the people with the right skill, because that didn't really exist at the time. You couldn't interview somebody and say, "Hey, do you have experience growing or selling cannabis?" That just wasn't. That just was not commonplace. So it was about finding people you trust. This is an all cash business. You needed to make sure you trust the people, and that was important. Transitioning through the years, it's become more commonplace. There are more cannabis businesses in California. You can find people with prior experience, and so now you really can interview and find the right person for the right job. And if you're looking for somebody with cannabis experience, they are out there now. And conversely, if you're looking for somebody with corporate experience, where maybe you don't need cannabis experience whatsoever, maybe you need a new CFO or you need a new compliance officer, they don't have to come from cannabis. They can come from a corporate world, and now those individuals are more willing to enter the cannabis space because the regulations are stronger and because the market size has grown. So the hiring has shifted quite a bit. But we have been able to find talented people, and we interview rigorously, and we do now try to find the right person for the right job, because that's important.
Last question, and thank you. You've been generous with your time. As we look forward to edibles, which will be legal sometime later this year, available at some point, hopefully later this year. What's your advice to retailers around introducing another new multiple lines of products? Any observations or any advice that you might have?
Yes, well, we do have a pretty large line of edibles, and so I do have some experience on that. My first thought is, well, control the process. Make sure you control the inputs. Make sure you control all the formulations, and make sure you've got all your quality specifications, in order, and that you can produce the products consistently day after day. That's number one. But the challenge, I think, that I know that Canada is going to have is the inability to brand and the inability to market, which makes it very difficult to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. When you're talking about flower, which is a commodity and ubiquitous, and maybe there's certainly there's different strains, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about a flower that you either roll or you put in a pipe and you smoke it. Where with manufactured goods, there are different ways of consuming. Is it a drink, or is it a topical, or is it an edible? And having a brand presence and brand awareness, I think, is very important to help build loyalty, trust, and even to help build education with the consumer. So I think that's going to be very challenging for Canada moving forward. I
really value your insights and the time you spent with us today. And again, thanks for coming up to share at Toronto, and really look forward to visiting next time I'm out in California. I love, never been to Sacramento, but I love to visit your store. So once again, thanks so much for making the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure, Michael. This was fun. Thank you.
Special thanks again to my guests, Tony, Tom, and John, for chatting with me on the podcast today. Apologies, by the way, to Tom for the technical gremlins towards the end of our interview that mushed up our interview tracks together, made it look like we were talking over each other, which we were not. and to John for a bit of echo on the very beginning of our interview. That's a wrap on this very special O Cannabis edition of The Voice of Retail. You can learn about their upcoming September conference, Grow Up, happening in beautiful Niagara Falls, Ontario, September 12th to the 14th at www.growupconference.com. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc., and you can learn more about me at www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. And stay tuned for our next regular edition of the podcast, available each and every Friday. If you like this edition, please subscribe, rate it on iTunes, and tell all your LinkedIn friends. Till next time, have a great week.